Hi everyone, my name is Michael and welcome to another episode of Deliberate Programming. In these videos, I watch a recording of myself doing a programming task and then I walk you through my thought process and I pay special attention to where I think I made mistakes or have room to improve. And so today I'm going to be doing basically a JavaScript interview style task. It's the kind of thing that if you were interviewing for a JavaScript job, it's the kind of task they might ask you to do in a live interview. And I didn't do very well. I don't think I would have gotten this job. So the project is for What Got Done, and you can see it here. It's a site that I maintain in my spare time that allows me to post updates about what I did this week, and some other people do the same and post short updates about their week. And so because it's a weekly habit, I wanted to, the feature I wanted to add in this video is the ability to show streaks. So I'm going to pull this up. And so this is ultimately what I built. I wanted something that shows I've made consistent updates for the past 147 weeks. This is the longest streak I've had because I've made updates every week since I created the site. If we look at some others, we can see this user Kenton has updated for the last 2 weeks. I guess they had a 54-week streak that they broke maybe over the holidays. And so this is what I was building. This is ultimately what I was trying to create. Based on all of your existing updates, it would just coalesce that information into this summary of what your streak is now and what your longest streak was ever. So one thing, last time I recorded this, people got confused and thought that I was doing live coding. I'm not actually live coding for most of this. For most of this, I'm going to be watching a video. And so I'm going to start the recording now. And so I've also added this time code in the upper right corner just to show you that we're watching a video. I'm not doing it live. And so I'm mostly going to watch this sped up. And so this is me just getting the dev environment set up. And the first thing I had to do was just think about how I actually wanted to implement this. And at first I was thinking, maybe I should implement this on the back end, this logic of figuring out where the streaks are. So the site What Got Done, there's a back end that's implemented in Golang, and then there's a front end that's implemented in Vue.js. And in the first few minutes is me just looking around at the code base because I haven't worked on the site in a few weeks. And I'm just trying to figure out what the information looks like when a user pulls down their weekly updates. What kind of data type does that look like? Am I getting this? I couldn't remember if I was getting everything at once for a user. And so you can see me looking at the entries get function here that's just showing, okay, it pulls down entries for a particular user. This probably could be named a little bit better because it's actually getting the entries for every entry for that particular user. So this is not so interesting. You're just seeing me think about what to implement and understand what the What Got Done implementation looked like. So I'm going to speed this up to 8x. And so here I'm starting to actually go into, this is the user profile implementation. This is in JavaScript. And so I create a new branch, and then I add this to the page. I add this, and zoom in here. Oops. You see me adding, oops. I'm going to try doing zoom in this video. I don't know how well that's going to work. So you can see me adding this little div on the front end. And I'm saying current streak is just a placeholder. I'm not even adding anything dynamic. I have a little typo there. So, and then I go down and I add functions to populate data for this place in the template. So speed this up, and I just put in placeholder values of 5 and 10 for the current streak and the longest streak. So you can see I create these methods in the bottom, and these are view computed properties. So for current streak, I have 5. For longest streak, I have 10. And then I go back up to the HTML template, and I just put in the placeholder for these values. And so what I'm expecting to see is when I load my page again for a profile, I'm expecting to see 5 and 10, and yeah, that's what we see. So that worked, and I'm going to continue. Okay, so I've got that basic functionality working, and so now I'm thinking about how I can actually I don't really want to just always return 5 and 10. I want to actually return the current streak. And so you can see me starting a for loop. And again, I'm trying to just get familiar with what the data types are. I've forgotten like what recent entries even look like. So the first thing I do is create a console.log where I'm just logging the entry. And I'm going to open that in the browser so that I can examine what's in that structure and just see what properties I need to examine in order to create the streak. And so you can see that actually didn't do anything useful because it just logs the object. I think I could, okay, yeah, I do actually jump into it and look at them, but it's a lot of things that are computed at runtime, so it's not that useful a way for me to inspect the information. And so what you saw me just do there is I created these 3 entries just so I have a series of 3 weekly updates that I can look at, because I'm not going to be able to compute a streak of just one update. It's looking at what happens when you have a series of consecutive updates. So I'm just creating these 3, and then you see me looking through the properties here. So I can see the date. And this right here is what is going to cause a lot of headache for me throughout this video. The fact that it is in Eastern Standard Time. So actually the object stores a native JavaScript date type. And the way I store it is I just have the date in it's partial ISO 8601 format. So what I'm actually storing looks kind of like a date object with just, let me pull up. So this is me now live coding, but what I'm actually storing in what got done is a thing that looks like this. And it's not 2021 anymore, it's 2022. So I'm storing a date that looks like this. So in JavaScript, when you store a date, it can parse a string that's in the proper format, but it puts it into, it displays it in local time. Eastern Standard Time is where I am in Massachusetts. And so that ends up being a huge wrench in the gears in this project, because I would much rather work in just UTC. The date, as you can see, it's just referring to a date. It's not referring to a particular time, so it doesn't really need to adjust for a time zone. But I'm not that familiar with using the date type in JavaScript, so what you'll see me struggle with in the video is figuring out how to get that to work. So I've got this, and then you also see the last modified time. So this is me just figuring out what the dates look like, and maybe panicking a little bit as I realize I maybe bit off more than I could chew in thinking about this. I'll also mention that when I did this video, I was, I'll pause for a second here. There's times when I'm programming where I feel like I'm feeling very mentally sharp, and this was not one of those days. I was recording this at around 4 p.m. on a Saturday, and so I'd already had a busy day, and I just didn't feel like I was in a place to like do hard thinking. But that's actually okay. Sometimes I do that programming and I can kind of just brute force my way through things just with good unit tests and good testing. Even if it's an ugly solution, I can push through. And so you see me in this video do that. So we're going to continue with this. I'm looking at the dates. So that's just me right here printing out the dates. And let's see, what am I doing here? I believe this is where let's see what I do. Okay, so now I'm printing out not just the entry, but the date. That gets me a little bit better information. One of the other things that I was confused about in the video, and I think it takes me a while to realize, is I originally went into the implementation thinking that the entries are sorted in descending order, so newest to oldest. But looking at this, they're actually oldest to, or sorry, yeah, they're oldest to newest. And so I have to make that adjustment. So let's see how quickly I pick that up. Okay, so you see me, this is me looking for date to UTC. So I'm trying to figure out how to get the dates in UTC. There are certain language like Go is a language where it's pretty sane about how it handles time zones. Other languages like JavaScript and Python don't help you out a lot in terms of converting between and even just managing the time zone. And so I'm realizing that JavaScript is one of these tough ones. I'm looking at the way they converted to UTC, and I'm not liking it. And I'm not liking this as a solution. It's one of those times where the solution just looks like much more complicated than the thing I'm actually trying to solve. So I'm looking for something that looks a little bit more elegant or simpler in matching my solution. So I'm not liking this. I continue to try to just go through it. And you can see me here. I haven't figured out the algorithm yet of how I'm going to figure out if the user is on a streak of consecutive updates. And so what I'm just doing is kind of trying to write out in pseudocode, not even pseudocode, just sketch out what I want to solve and where. So I'm saying that I want to figure out what if the user is on a streak at all. So if they haven't updated in 6 months and this is their first update, that's not a streak. And I want to make sure I don't connect that to previous updates. And then I also, we're figuring out just the last streak. We're not looking for their longest streak in this function. So once we find a non-consecutive entry, so an entry that's more than a week apart from their previous one, the streak ends. So I'm just sketching out the solution here. And so this is me going back to trying to find the difference between two dates. And so this is seeming pretty complicated. This one's also seeming pretty complicated. I'm just scanning through and not liking this one either. This is a lot of work just to find the difference between two dates. And then here we go. I see I kind of jumped away from that too quickly. But there was a solution using the moment.js library, which I'm already using in what got done. So normally I wouldn't pull in a dependency like moment.js is pretty heavy. I'm not that interested in pulling in a new dependency just to fix such a small issue. But because I'm already paying the cost of having this library, I might as well use it. So I'm looking at this thing and saying, okay, like I'm importing moment other places. I'll pull it in here too. And this is looking like a really easy solution because moment is doing a lot of the heavy lifting to make it easy for you to just calculate the difference in days, whereas a lot of the other solutions using native JavaScript were more complicated. But I'm seeing this and thinking like, okay, this is doable. I should use this. So that's where I am now. We're 14 minutes in, so I better hurry up with the narration. It's going to be a really long video. And so, okay, yeah, I'm calculating the current date. I'm wrapping it with moment. And then what I'm doing here is just doing console.log to see what that looks like, to make sure it matches what I'm thinking. And so we can see the date difference does match what I expect. Well, maybe not a little bit because I'm not expecting this negative number, but that's not surprising because it was a date in the future. But I'm seeing that it does kind of what I expect, which is reduces the difference of dates to just a number. That's the number of days between those two dates. So that's looking pretty promising. And so from there, I'm feeling like, okay, like this is how I'm going to calculate dates. And so we can speed this up. And so I'm trying to figure out, are they on a current streak? So is the update that's first in their list, and you can see here's a mistake I'm making here, and we'll come to that a little bit later. But I'm trying to figure out, okay, this first item, or actually the most recent, the last item in the list, is it within the last week? And so I come up with a type error, cannot read properties of undefined reading date. And so I handle this badly. So the actual error is right here. So I'm too used to programming in Python where you can do a -1 index and get the last element. In JavaScript, that doesn't work. And so I saw .date, undefined. There's some place where I'm referring to a date and the object is undefined. It really should have led me to either here or here, maybe here too, because that's the only place where I'm referring to a date. But I think I don't figure that out. I look at red herrings that have nothing to do with the error message. Yeah, so the first thing I think of is, oh, okay, maybe I had something where this list was empty. So that wouldn't have caused that error, but it actually is a good idea anyway, because I have to handle the case of when the list is 0. And you can see I'm also too used to Golang here, where I'm leaving out the parentheses in the if statement. This should be a triple equals, not just a double equals. I might have figured that out in the video. Okay, but I'm still, so I do solve a different problem, but I'm still getting that undefined date. So I come back here finally, and you see here, I think I'm getting a little bit suspicious about that -1. So I'm still getting the same error about the date. And okay, so now, yeah, I'm getting suspicious of the -1. I'm putting it in its own console.log statement just so I see, does this work how I remember in Python, the same way from Python to JavaScript? And I'm seeing it doesn't. So from there, I see, okay, it has to be length. I'm putting it in the wrong place, but I'll fix that in a second. So okay, I say if I do it based on the length rather than just indexing a negative number, does that work? And I can see here it did. I'm still getting this error later, but this little thing shows me that it logged correctly, and I can move on. I don't think I expand this, but oh, I do. Okay. So I proved that worked. I identify where the error was. And so instead of doing this long thing, I make a variable called last entry that stores the last entry in the list, or and I rename it most recent entry, which I like that refactoring. That's a good job by me. So now it's saying the data since last update is 8. And I think the problem here is I'm assuming that the ordering is, actually I don't remember what the issue is here, because the last one should be the most recent, I think. No, the last one actually I believe is the oldest. And so okay, I just fixed that and realized that the first one is the most recent. Okay, so data since last update is 5. And so we're getting closer. I can calculate the difference between two dates now, so that's good. And this is me just doing more of console.log to make sure I'm understanding how the moment.js date difference works. So I do another printout. And what am I looking for here? Oh, okay, I think I'm again realizing that 0 is the most recent rather than the last element. And so I'm saying if it's been more than a week since the last update, now the user is not on a streak. So if their last update was more than a week ago, we would return 0 to indicate there's 0 consecutive entries in this current streak because they're not on a streak. They haven't updated in a while. But if that isn't true, then I continue what I want to do. I'm getting pretty close to the actual algorithm here. So if their most recent update occurred in the last week, then I continue through the list of entries. And so I'm starting from element, where am I? I'm starting from the end. So again, I'm still a little bit confused about oldest to newest or newest to oldest. The beginning of the array is the most recent, so this should really be I equals 1, and I think I'm maybe realizing that here. There we go. Yeah, I realized it. Good job. Passed me. But I make another error here, actually 2 errors. So I want to iterate through the list of entries until the end to see where the streak ends. So I'm looking for, what I'm going to do with each entry is compare the entry to the last entry and calculate the difference in days. And if it's more than a week of difference, then the streak ended and I should return the streak length number. But what I screwed up is, and so what I was thinking at the time was, okay, I'm comparing like the element to its subsequent element. So I can't go to the last element because then I would index out of the array. I would go 1 too far. So I have to go to entries.length -2. But the mistake there is that's actually not right because I'm comparing it to the previous entry. So I equals 1, I'm comparing the entry to the one just before it. So I actually can go to the end of the array. And this should be I is less than or equal to recent entries.length -1, not -2. So let's see how long it takes me to figure that out. I think a while, unfortunately, but we'll continue. So I'm going to speed this up. Okay, so yeah, and I'm kind of getting there. I'm saying, okay, previous entry is equal to the most recent entry that I just grabbed here. And then I'm getting closer to this idea of comparing the entry in the loop to the entry that I just looked at. So I'm saying if the days between entries, and then I pull this moment date delta function. And you can see me getting a little bit lazy here. So I'm realizing that you saw me put in the math.abs, so that's calculating the absolute value, because I'm noticing that on some, like, it's not just calculating an absolute value in terms of difference of dates. If one is more recent, it can be negative. And so just like right now, when I'm trying to remember like what makes it negative versus positive, I didn't feel like thinking about that when I was programming this. And so I was just like, okay, like I don't care. Let's just paper over it with math.abs. So it's just always a positive number. And that's generally a sign that I'm being like a little bit lazy. I should know if it's positive or negative because that makes a difference, even though I can just paper over it. But that's an example of me being a little bit lazy. And so again, I'm trying to print out the this variable just to make sure I understand what it's doing and it's going to match what I expect. And it doesn't, because it doesn't print out. I'm going to the console here. It's actually not printing out anything. So that's not what I expected. I expected it to actually go into this for loop. And the reason you can kind of see it if you're following along, because the array that I'm testing only has 3 elements. So we're doing 3 minus 2, and that's equals 1. And so the comparison is 1 is less than 1, so it doesn't actually even enter the loop. And so I realized that, okay, it's got to be, I'm examining whether this should be 2, but I'm saying, okay, it's less than or equals, but I'm actually missing the second bug there. But I at least get into the loop iterator. I get this days between entries is 7. It's actually -7, and you can see me, I think I just swap the variable so that it comes out positive again. And then I'm saying if the days between entries isn't 7, then I know that the streak is broken, so I return the current streak length. So that's getting pretty close to the actual algorithm. And then if that isn't the case, I continue the loop and I increment the streak length. So I say it's 1 longer because we've found a consecutive element. Again, I didn't fix the issue that I noticed the first time, that it's only doing 1 loop iteration. I should have noticed that what I want to see is actually 2 loop iterations, because I'm starting on 1. It's an array of length 3. So I'm still trying to figure this out. And again, the problem is, when I was thinking about it, I was thinking I would be comparing the entry to the subsequent entry, but in my actual implementation, I'm comparing it to the previous entry. So this should be -1, and I'm not realizing that. Let's see how long it takes me to realize that. Hopefully not too long. We're about a quarter of the way through this. Okay, there, I just realized it. And we got it. So that's what we expect to see. It's 2 loop iterations. And based on that, I'm thinking that I got the loop iterations right. So actually, oh, sorry, it wasn't calculating. It was calculating 2. And the issue is actually that I forgot to, now we got it. So it calculated 3 because there were 3 entries. But the issue was that there's this variable we're maintaining ourselves, this previous entry equals most recent entry. And I forgot to update that at the end. And this is something I actually don't like doing. I feel like it's a dangerous pattern for exactly that reason, where you have some variable that you're relying on yourself to update within the loop instead of relying on constructs that are inherently part of the loop. So I actually refactored this. I'm going to show you how I refactored this. Let's pull this up. And actually refactored this a lot, so you might not recognize a lot of it. But this is, I changed current streak to latest streak. And instead of maintaining a variable, I just go based on the indexes. So that ensures that I can't forget to update the variable. I'm saying I-1 compare it to the entry at I. So in that case, you're not remembering to like, okay, at the end of this loop, you have to do some bookkeeping. No, because it always has to be correct because you're just doing it based on the indexes. And I got rid of the variable names. It's no longer saying like current entry and previous entry, but I've refactored enough that that's clear just from the variable and the index. So this is me live. We're not looking at a video right now. This is what I ultimately refactored this function to be. So you're seeing, come back to the video, you're seeing me kind of slowly reach that point. So at this point, I fixed the bug, so this is mostly working. It got the correct date for the current streak. And then we reach another bug, which really confused me. So I've got this implementation correct. So current streak, I think there are no more bugs. It's at least getting 3 for the very simple case. But I think what I'm doing here is, I think I'm going to try to do it on my production database. Let's see if that is the case. I think this is me just sitting and thinking. So sorry for the dead air. So I'm sitting on here, and okay, now I'm going to. I guess I've decided to, instead of, I was briefly going to try to check it on my production database because I can pull that down because it's just SQLite makes that really easy. I think I decided instead to continue the implementation of longest streak. So I had finished calculating the current streak, and so I'm now proceeding to say, okay, like I can get the most recent streak, but what's the longest in the user's history? And so to start that, I'm saying I'm creating 2 variables. One is to keep track of what's the longest streak, and the other is to keep track of the current streak. So I'm initializing both of them to 0. And you can see me again kind of go into the same pattern I was thinking about. But in this case, it actually is correct. So I'm doing length -2. But in this case, I haven't done it yet, but I'm doing comparing the element at I to the element at I plus 1. So in this case, it is correct to stop at length -2, because if I went to length -1, it would index out of the array. I did forget to change this to I plus 1, but hopefully I'll remember that in the video. Let's see. And so I'm saying, okay, when we find these 2 entries that are more than 7 days apart, if it's not a 1-week disparity between the 2 entries, then we reset the streak to 0, because that means there's been a break in the streak, so we want to start the counter over again. But that's actually not correct. I'll realize later that it should actually be 1. If you're seeing the next element and it doesn't match, you want to start at 1 because you're viewing the element that starts a new streak. So it should start at 1, not 0. And so that causes some problems later on, but for now we can ignore that. And so the way I'm calculating the longest is I'm just taking the maximum of the longest and the current. So that still looks right to me. That's a decent implementation. Seems intuitive. And then I'm adjusting it to say, I'm flipping the logic to say if the days between the entries are 7, it's been a week since the last entry, increase the count of the current streak, otherwise reset it to 0. Again, that's a bug. I should have reset it to 1. And I haven't changed this last thing yet, but I'll get there. Okay, so now I'm returning the longest. And so let's see if that works. So I'm coming back to the browser, and I'm seeing I'm realizing I had a typo here. It says long get streak instead of longest, but it's returning 0. So the implementation must not be right, because what I'm expecting to see is a 3. So why is it returning 0? So I actually looking at it now, I forget what the bug is. Let's see if past me figures it out. Hopefully he does. So it's returning 0, and okay, so to debug, I'm just going to add a console.log to say the current iteration and then the days between entries. And oh, that was it. I forgot to do I plus 1 in that previous place. So now I've got it to 2. It logged 0, 7 days between entries, and then on 1, it's 7 days between entries. And so, yeah, it's returning 0, or it's returning 2 rather, which is incorrect, and I'm trying to figure out what the bug is. And the bug is actually what I did mention, which is that when I reset the streak, it should be reset to 1 and not 0. And so it takes me a little bit to figure that out. Let's see. Do I get to it? So that we're looking for me to figure out that this should be a 1 instead of a 0. So let's see how long it takes me to figure that out. Come on, Michael, you got it. Oh no. Okay, that's not right. Oh, okay. For some reason, I think I just gave up on solving that for the moment. But okay, we're now moving into a very confusing bug that I ran into. So I mentioned before that I was debating maybe pulling down my production database. So this is me doing that. I had an archived version of my production database from the end of December, rather the beginning of December, when I was working on a user export feature. So I had this copy of the database, so I'm just copying it to data/store.db. And so what that should do is replace all the development data. I have like synthetic data in my development environment that's just kind of like simple user information. But this should replace all that with my production database at the time of December 11th. And so oops, sorry about the pixelation. So I'm going back to the website, my dev environment, and I'm looking for, let's slow this down. I'm looking for this data to show up. I'm expecting to see my production database, and I'm not seeing it. And I'm looking for, okay, is something replacing my my database in the serve script? So I'm looking at mod.conf. Mod is the hot reloading script I use. There's nothing there, and so I look for my serve script, and actually I do find the problem is that I have a script. When I start the server, one of the things it does is it repopulates the database. So I did pull down the production database, but when I ran the serve script, I overwrote it. And so that's why I'm seeing my dev data instead of my actual data. So what I'm doing here is commenting this out so that next time I run the serve script, I won't see my dev data. So what I'm doing here is I'm copying that data again, my production database, to store.db, which is the database that I'm using in the app. So I do that copy, I run serve again, and so I'm expecting to see my production data. So I come back to the browser, I'm expecting to see my real user data. It's taking a little longer because it has to start the hot reloading server. But okay. But you see, this is Bob and Joe, those are dev users, so I'm not getting it. And the problem, it took me until today when I was rewatching the video and experimenting to figure out what I actually did wrong. If you're familiar with SQLite, you might have figured it out, but the problem is actually here. So I'm replacing this store.db file with this file, which is the production database. But what I missed is these db-shim and db-wal. I don't know what SHM is. WAL is the write-ahead log. So the database isn't just this one file, it's actually this set of 3 files. So the reason I'm still seeing the stale data is because I'm overriding store.db, but I'm not overriding the write-ahead log. And so I think SQLite is just pulling data from the write-ahead log that hasn't been merged back into the main database. And this really threw me. You see me continue to try. I don't know how long it takes me. I don't actually figure this out. And this is me like, what is going on? I'm looking at the size of this database. It's 3.5 megs, and I'm like, and then I'm looking at the size of this. So like it's the same size. My dev database is very small. It's not 3.4 megs. So I'm just like really confused how I could still be seeing this. But the issue is actually this. It's the 1.2 meg in the write-ahead log, and I'm missing it. But I'm so confused because I'm saying like I'm writing over this database. Like what? How can I be still seeing this old data? And I'm sort of going crazy figuring out like, is something still? And then I'm like, okay, like let's stop. This is what I do here. I say like, let's stop even running my app. I'm just gonna run the SQLite command line tool. and make sure, maybe I'm confused and this database is actually a snapshot of dev data. So I run the tables. It's to find out what the tables in this thing are. Select star from user profiles because that'll, and so I'm seeing this. These are real users. Like nload hosts is a real user in the production site. I made sure to pick a table that has all public information. So this is, oops, sorry about that. I didn't want to expose any private data for the video, so I'm seeing like, okay, that is the correct database. Like, what's going on? So I'm in this. I'm like, is something going on? Like, why am I not seeing? I'm still seeing Bob and Joe. Like, what's going on? And then I think I decide I don't have to actually go into SQLite. I can do it from the command line. I'm doing the same thing. So I'm seeing like, okay, like if I, from the command line, if I look at this database and then I try just with store, the one that my app is currently reading, and now I'm seeing these are my dev users. So I'm like really confused. What happened here? Again, it's these pesky files. It's the shim and wal that are causing me to see stale data. And it takes me, I don't know how long, probably like 10 or 15 minutes to figure this out. So I'm going into my populate dev data script because I'm suspicious that something else is calling this script to populate the dev data. And so to eliminate that possibility, I put in an exit command just to make sure if something is doing that, it should break that script. So I put in an exit command, nothing's calling it, but still I'm doing copy, and still I'm seeing it's still the dev data, and I'm going nuts trying to figure this out. Copy it again, it's still the dev data. Limited 5. Oh, and now I finally got it to, it's the production data. So I think I just got lucky, and I think that's what happened. It happened to have compacted the database at that point. So when I overwrote store.db, it actually overwrote everything. So finally I'm seeing what I want. Finally, okay, I feel like I'm not crazy, but I don't know what happened. And so I reload the web app, and okay, I'm getting the production database. This is the update that I had made just before taking that snapshot. So now things are working, and I can look at my own, like with real data, and it says current streak is 0 and longest streak is 52. So we've got a problem here because current streak is 0. That actually makes sense because it's a snapshot of data from December. So that would mean that I'm not on a streak. I haven't updated, based on this data, I haven't updated in a few weeks. But the longest streak is 52. And so I created the site in 2019, and I was pretty sure that I've had updates every single week since then. And 52 is suspicious because it's the number of weeks in a year. So it suggests to me that something is wrong. And also we can see here that there are at least 140 entries for me. So why is it saying that there's only 52? So there's a bug, and I'm trying to figure out this bug. And this is me just doodling around in the JavaScript console. And here we go. I'm just putting some more output in console.log and reloading this page. And also one thing I'll mention is this is a big weakness in my workflow that I was that all of these tests I was doing were in the actual app. I'll cover that a little later in the video. I come up with a solution for that, but way too long. We're 45 minutes into this this playback, so I wish I had figured this out earlier, that I could have done it without the heavy weight. And ooh, I just fixed the bug without even realizing it. Let's slow that down. What did I do? Oh, okay. So this is a hack fix. So I'm suspicious that this is a daylight savings time issue, and it actually is. So when I'm saying like the days between entries, if it's not 7, so I think I can paper over it by fudging it and saying if it's less than or equal to 7, and so that's what I do here. Say if it's less than or equal to 7, then you're still on the streak, because I'm realizing that daylight savings time might sometimes shift it to 6 if there's been a jump forward or leap back. I forget which would actually cause this. But I tried changing it to less than or equal to 7, and let's see, and it works. I get 142. And again, this is like an ugly thing. I know I have to to fix because I don't fully understand why that works. I would expect that to work in one daylight savings direction and not the other, because there's a forward and a back to it. But it seems to have fixed it for everything, but it's still a pretty ugly fix. So you'll see what I added here is in a second. I believe I add a to-do to myself saying that I have to, I'm still maybe trying to figure out what happened. But I think I add a to-do to myself saying that I need to figure out how to deal with daylight savings time instead of just saying less than or equals 7, because I know that's hacky. So but as long as I got this little to-do, I'm safe. I'm not just papering it over. And here, okay, this is what I mentioned, that the inefficiency of what I was doing. It really was slowing me down to just keep switching to the app itself, and we saw that with running the production data. But the thing is, like, I'm a big fan of unit testing. In JavaScript, I'm not that familiar with unit testing, and I don't generally find it as useful in JavaScript, especially with Vue, because I don't find it as useful. Like, you have to do a lot of annoying work just to get the component set up into a test harness. And I just often find it's not worth the trouble, at least with my level of skill at unit testing. But in this case, I'm realizing the whole logic of calculating streaks does lift pretty cleanly out. It could have just been in a JavaScript module instead of in the UI component itself. And so here I'm looking at my unit tests and trying to figure out, can I write just pure JS unit tests and pull this out to just a JS function instead of having it be baked into my user profile.vue. And so this is me starting to do that. I make a file called streaks.js, and I pull out the functions that I implemented. Instead of doing like this.entries, I'm just taking the entries as a parameter, and then I'm exporting them here, importing them in the component I was using. So this is me just importing what I exported to or refactored into controllers. So instead of computing this inline, it calls the current streak method that I defined elsewhere. So there's a bug here. I meant to do current streak and then pass in this.recent entries. I'm actually doing recent entries.length, which is not going to work, and we'll see that in a moment. And I make the same error with longest streak. And so cannot read properties of undefined reading date. And this is, you see me making the same mistake that I made before, where I get an error message in JavaScript and kind of ignore what it's telling me and look for a simpler solution. So let's see. I think I'm like, oh, did I import this wrong? I'm kind of missing that the error is at the call side. I'm looking for, like, am I exporting these values correctly? And let's see. And here, I realized that I identify the error. I have the length parameter that I'm passing, and I realized that I got to get rid of that. So I do that. Great. And if I look at this user nload hoots, their longest streak is 5. Kenton has longest streak of 54, which I actually didn't realize. Go Kenton. And so this is looking kind of correct. The current streaks are coming out as 0 because this is an old snapshot. And I'll talk about that a bit more. So this is me just kind of messing around with the UI, because this is not, obviously, like, not a good way to present it, and saying like longest streak and current streak. And so the next few minutes is me just kind of fiddling around with the UI and trying to come up with something that looks a little bit more user-friendly, a better way to present this information. So I changed it to the username is on a streak. They posted updates for the last N weeks. And then I try to come up with the same thing for their longest streak. And then let's see what that looks like. So its longest streak was 54 weeks. It's supposed to be of weekly updates, typo there. But this is just me kind of futzing around with the UI here. And then here I'm trying, because the snapshot data only has entries up to December 11th, so it's not seeing any kind of recent update, I'm creating my own entries under this username Jim to try to show what it looks like when there actually are recent updates, so it can show me the current streak. And I think I'm realizing there that it doesn't make sense to, if there's only one entry, that's not a streak, so it has to be at least two, and I changed that, to both of them. So with Jim having only one entry, there's no mention of streaks anymore, so that's correct. I go and backdate an entry from the week before, and then if I go back, it says Jim has 2 weeks of updates, which is correct. And then I'm tweaking around the wording a little bit, and that's not so exciting. And then I go back to myself, still at 142 weeks of updates. And then this is me trying to figure out how to run unit tests. But before I get into that, I want to show how I fixed the issue of pulling down the production database. So I'm going to do, I added a convenient script called, actually no, this already existed, populate dev data. So this populates the site with dev data. So if I reload here, I think I have to reload and get rid of what was just there. Oh, actually, it's because it's seeing a stale version of the site. So, okay, now I'm getting, so this is just the dev data. It's Bob and Joe, very simple updates. So, and it's doing a hot reload that I didn't really want it to do. Okay, so that's how I get it to show the dev data. I kill the server and I call populate dev data. But the convenient script that I added was download prod DB. And so I'm using Lightstream and SQLite. Lightstream I really love, especially for this. So all of my production data is in a cloud bucket. And so I can just use Lightstream to pull it down. I don't have to even turn off my production server. I can just pull down the replica that's in cloud storage. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to say dev scripts. What did I call it? What is it? Download prod DB. So it's pulling down my production database. This happens pretty fast. Again, I don't have to even turn off my production server or do anything to make sure the export's safe, because it's not even touching my production server. It's touching the data replica. And then I'm going to call serve to serve that data. And let's do this again. It takes a little while for the view server to start up again. Okay, so this is correct. So what we're seeing is the same thing we would see if we went to the real what got done site. So this is the live site. We're seeing Lloyd W had an update on January 14th. I have the other update on January 14th. But I've got that in my local server, and that's super cool. That it's like a real testament to SQLite and to Lightstream that it's that easy for me to just pull down my entire production database in a single command. The other change I had to make for that is with my populate dev data. Actually, where is it? No, it's in my serve script. I only call this populate dev data if the store.db file is not there. And then the other thing I did was, let's see. When I call this, I make sure to remove the pattern. So it's not just store.db. It deletes the store.db and the -shim and -wal. So I don't run into that issue I had with the stale files throwing me off. So rewatching this video and noticing that I ran into that issue, and then noticing like how convenient it is to be able to like quickly switch between dev and production data, really handy. So again, that's shout out to SQLite and Lightstream for just making that so easy. Like this is an exact match for all of my production data, and I just have it in my dev environment with just one command. So that's super convenient. And so I'm going to go back to the video. And in the video at this point, I'm trying to figure out how to add a new unit test for the this streaks controller that I just added. So I'm starting, I do this a lot when I am trying to create a new test. I just take an existing test. So store.spec is the spec for the data store. And so that was the closest thing to this test. So I just grabbed a copy of that. And what I'm doing here is just trying to create like the simplest possible test. So I'm saying dummy test, getting rid of all the logic, and just saying expect foo to be bar. So I think that's hopefully should fail. So I'm just looking for the test failure. And it does fail, but not for the reason that I want, because it's not actually finding the test unit script. And I'm realizing that that's another problem, that for a lot of the other data tests, I have a convenience script. So like I have a script for check and go formatting. I have a script for running my interrogation tests, running my go tests. I don't have a script for running my front-end unit tests because I haven't been giving them enough love. But I know I do run them, or at least I'm hoping I do. And so I do a search for the places where I'm calling test unit. And I'm realizing this is my Circle CI, so this runs on every check-in in the cloud. And so I'm seeing, this confirms that I must not have a dev script for this because it's just calling the raw npm script. And so I'm realizing, okay, this should just be a convenience script that I can call. So I'm gonna grab this, first I can just run on the command line. And there I'm finally seeing the error that I wanted to see. So there's a lot of warning spew, unfortunately. But let's see if I got, okay, so expected bar, receive foo, so this is working as expected. I've got my unit tests running. And so I create a new file called run front-end unit tests. And so I just put in this command, and then I'm going to replace this CI with a reference to that script instead of just calling the command directly. And I realized I actually have a typo. I did front-end unit test, so I fixed that. And so now I've got this script, and I'm pulling in the stuff I need to call it. And so I say run, make it executable, and then I run the test. And I'm still seeing that one failure, which is what I want. I know that the thing is, I wrote that test to fail. I'm seeing a lot of log spew. I don't really love that, and I'd like to fix that, but that's for another time. And here I'm trying to figure out if there's a way for me to call just this one, just to test this one file. I'm not that familiar. I'm not even sure what test framework I'm using. I think it's Jest, because it's been a long time since that was set up. So I'm looking for how I actually call just a single file under Jest. And of course, with like everything JavaScript, there's 9 million different frameworks and different ways to do it. So I try calling npm test, that doesn't work. Try calling npm test with the test file, that doesn't work. So I'm like, okay, how do I call just? I just want to call just this one file. I don't want to execute all my other tests. So you see me start to implement more of this test. I guess I, for whatever reason, decided to give up on that whole mission of executing just this one file and make my first test. So this is a common pattern for me when I'm starting with a test. The easiest thing to handle is just like the empty case. So when I pass in 0 entries to an empty array to current streak, it should give back a 0. And then longest streak should do the same thing on 0 entries, and it does. I get all passes, so that worked. And then we're coming back. I don't know why I'm looking at entry feed. Oh, I think I'm looking a little bit. I'm trying to figure out whether I should pursue the warning messages it's showing me. But I'm coming back to here. I'm trying to figure out how to call it with just, so I'm realizing it does like view CLI service to call the tests. I'm trying to figure out how I can write my own script that just tests that one file. This is actually finally what gives it to me, -t and then the file name. And so I think I figured that out here. Do I figure it out? Let's see. Yeah, okay. I take their advice and call it with dash t. So this is me calling it with dash t. And it works. I get just my streaks.spec instead of calling the other ones. I get rid of all that log spew. So that works. And then here I get into a funny issue where I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm saying like, okay, I've got this test unit npm script. So how do I add another script that takes just a parameter? And I'm trying to figure out how to like take parameters here. Meanwhile, I just did it. Like I just called npm run test and then passed extra parameters to the unit tests. I'm a little slow here. I'm not realizing that I did that, and I'm looking for how to pass parameters to an npm script. I just did it, so there's not really much that I can find. I think in a few seconds I realize what I've done, and there's not really anything to do. Yeah. So then here it's going to be hard for me to remember the dash t, and so what I'm doing is adding an option to my convenience script where I can just pass an extra parameter here, and then it runs just that one file. And so I'm copying from another one. I think you see me here briefly consider using the bash getopt functionality. Yeah. So I know that bash getops exists. That's like the more, I don't know, I don't want to call it the more elegant way. It's like leaning more on what's built into bash, this getops function. And it helps you parse command line parameters. I always find getops so confusing. I've tried to like look into it a few times, and it's just the syntax is, oh my gosh, like what is this? Like what does that mean? I think I go through this exercise every few months where I'm like, okay, today is the day I'm going to learn getops, and then I get to this like shift opt-in D, and here actually I'm going to the TinyPilot code repository because I know TinyPilot, the developers that work with me on TinyPilot, they understand getops, and so they've put it in a few places in TinyPilot. So I'm like, okay, this is using getops. Maybe I can just look at this. But this isn't helping me that much because these are just, let's see, it's just printing help. It's not doing what I want exactly, which is like taking a flag and then a parameter. So I'm desperately looking for like, is there an example of this that I'm familiar with where I can apply the same thing? I'm not finding anything. So I go to here and I'm just adding I'm doing it the hard way. So there's not much here. This is not that interesting. I make a mistake here by adding, there's a space here that there shouldn't be, and that comes to bite me. Same thing here. And I think you're going to see extra flags. And it's saying command not found because I've put these extra spaces. And I'm missing it. Not that interested in going through that. Okay. Okay, so here I'm just adding some more unit tests. I've forgotten that it's 2022 and I'm putting in 2021 dates, which is a little funny. But there's not too much to mention here. Here I'm noticing that I'm using to be, and I suspect that that's testing equality in not the right way, because these are just simple numbers. I'm assuming to be is doing some like identity testing if they're the same object. And I believe that's true, so I changed it to toEqual to test equality rather than identity. And okay, so now we're kind of getting back into the interesting stuff. So now that I have unit tests in place, that I'm starting to work on unit tests, I can be a little bit more aggressive about refactoring. So I don't have all the unit tests yet, but let's see. Oh, sorry, actually, I don't have the unit test, and what I'm finding is an error. So no, sorry, what I'm finding is that it depends on the current time. So this is depending on the time the test runs. So you don't want that in your unit test. You don't want the unit tests to work on Monday, but not to work on Wednesday. And so I think this is where I'm realizing that I should fix that. Oops, sorry, paused. So I'm passing in this current time. Yeah. And so I'm adding some unit tests here, and this is helpful because it doesn't rely on the current time, and it's convenient because I can just set the default parameter of the current time when that's not specified. I don't love having parameters that are only for unit testing, but in this case it's not such a bad trade-off. So let's speed through this. And so I'm adding some more unit tests. I think I end up finding, so then I want to make sure that if it's been more than a week since the entry. So I think, yeah, January 14th to January 22 is more than a week. So I'm making sure that it returns 0, which it does. So that's cool. And now I'm going to test to make sure it can calculate 2 consecutive entries. And that passes as well, so that's good. And now I start to add entries for longest streak. So this is not a ton of tests for current streak, but I felt like that was pretty good coverage of the important edge cases. So I say after a single entry for longest streak conveniently doesn't depend on the current time, so it's a little bit cleaner in that way. So with a single entry for longest streak, it should return 1. And after 2 consecutive entries, it should return 2. And then this is a little bit unusual, and usually I write a test and then I run the tests. But I think I'm getting a little bit overeager here and thinking like, okay, I'm pretty sure these are all going to pass. And so I'm just spouting out all the test cases that I can think of. So the case where it's just 1 entry, there's 2 entries. And then I also want to add a case where the longer streak is after a break in consecutive entries. So I'm adding that here. That's this last test. So I think this is where I realized that I've gotten the dates wrong. So I changed it all to 2022 and then this to 2021. So I'm saying, oops. And I think right here is, I run this test and I think it fails. Slow this down. I think I see a failure here. Oops, I don't know why I closed it so quickly. Oh, maybe so I see a failure, I changed it to 3 because I realized that the expected value was wrong anyway. But now I'm actually realizing that it's wrong either way because it received a 2 when the correct answer should have been 3. So we've got a bug. Bug is still there even though I changed it. So 3 versus 2. So this unit test turned up a bug in the longest streak function. So I'm just adding a little bit more documentation here, and then I'm going to go into longest streak to try to figure out what went wrong. Yeah, but me adding a comment didn't fix the error. I don't know why I ran the test again. And I think I'm suspicious of this daylight savings time thing again, because that's the part of this solution that I know is ugly. But I think I mentioned this before, the actual error is here. So this should be a 1, and let's see if I realize that. And so what I'm doing here is just printing out console logs. And the issue I'm noticing is that it's not, in this particular JS framework, it's not showing me where one test starts and one ends. So I don't know which test emitted these console logs, so that's making it a little bit harder. And what I want to do is just comment out, like a simple thing of just commenting out all the tests that I'm not interested in. So that's what I try to do. But then I get caught by this, where I'm trying to document the parameter with inline comments, and that's preventing me from commenting out a long segment. And so I struggle with what to do there, and I'm like, maybe I should. But then I decide I actually can just leave the current streak, because the thing I'm trying to debug is longest streak. And so if only longest streak is outputting console.log, I can get by with just that. And so we're seeing the console output. This is iteration, streak count, and then longest streak, I believe. And so you get to, on iteration 1, it resets back to 0. Iteration 2, it resets its increment to 1. And so the problem here is on this iteration, this should be 1, and then we should land on 3 here for both of these, and that's not happening. And so let's see if Past Michael figures this out. Again, the bug is right here. Yeah, and there, I got it, I figured it out. And then I run my tests again, and let's see, and it all passes. And so you can see then the console.log does what we expect. And so this is cool. So, and at this point, I'm pretty happy with the test coverage. So I've got tests that cover the important things. I'm not so happy with the implementation. This is overall pretty clunky and not that easy to read. But now is like generally one of my favorite parts of programming because I've got the functionality correct. I've got my unit tests locking in the correct behavior. And so now I can pretty aggressively refactor because I know that if I screw something up, my unit tests are going to tell me. And so the first thing I decide to refactor is this logic here of like, I'm trying to figure out if this is a recent entry, but this is all of this. So like usually when I have to like write a comment to explain what the functionality does, usually that's a good indication to me that I should refactor to make it self-documenting. I should add a function that explains like what the high-level operation is. And so that's what I'm doing here. So I'm putting this in. I've refactored this snippet into this isEntryRecent function that gives a little bit more clarity. Then I'm just going to replace all that with the call to isEntryRecent. Cool. So I've got that refactoring, and now that I've refactored, I rerun the unit test to make sure everything still passes. Cool, it does. I uncomment the longest streak stuff. Not that should have changed. And then I think I'm looking again at this to-do, figuring out whether now is the time to fix that. Yeah, I'm really struggling with this DST thing and looking for a way to get out of this. Okay, and so I'm coming back to this daylight savings time thing and looking for, look at the moment documentation. And actually the first thing on the moment documentation is the moment documentation tells you not to use moment.js. So that was giving me pause. I'm already using moment.js. So actually just now I noticed that it mentioned the temporal, which I've never actually used. Maybe I should look into that. But I'm seeing that it's telling me to get rid of moment, and that's making me a little bit nervous and saying like, okay, maybe I should make it easy for me to get rid of moment, or even like not add one more moment dependency to my project if I'm eventually going to get rid of moment. So I'm realizing that the real reason I'm using moment is just to calculate the days between two different dates. And so I'm saying like, instead of doing that in lots of different places, let's have a single function that's responsible for that. So it calls moment a.diff moment b of days. And so now what I'm going to do is get rid of all the references to moment and make sure it's just in this one function. So I don't have lots of places to remove moment if I decide I have to get rid of the moment.js library. And so I'm looking for all the places where I'm calling moment and realizing I can factor. And that's actually making it more readable. So like the moment.diff and then days is not as obvious. But when I'm calling a function called days between dates, it's a lot clearer what I'm trying to get out of the logic. And that I did the refactoring, that still works. I think I actually just broke it there, but that's okay because I've got unit tests and they're going to tell me. I changed it to less than or equal to 7. I think that's actually incorrect, but let's see. Yeah, so I broke it, but I think I'll figure that out pretty fast because that's what good unit tests tell you. Let's see. Yeah, so I'm looking for, right, it's trying to see if there's more than a week between entries. Fixed, now it's working again. Changing it here as well. And then instead of saying days between dates, I'm noticing that all the places where I call days between dates, except for this one instance, I'm actually calculating the difference between entries. So it would be more convenient if I could just say days between entries and not have to pass this date parameter or reference the date property. And so I changed that days between entries, days between dates, days between entries. Okay, there we go. So we're getting cleaner. This is the power of good unit tests, that it lets us really aggressively refactor this. And every time we refactor, we can make sure that everything's still working correctly. And so let's see, What am I looking for here? Oh, okay. Now I'm back on this, like, can I convert to UTC? I've looked this up in the meantime, and I think it's actually, my understanding is that the date format does store in UTC, but when it outputs it, it outputs it in local time. So I think I didn't come up with a good, you see me again looking at these solutions where I'm like, this is like way more complicated than I want. This seems like too hard for the problem that's at hand. And I don't love this idea of like converting it to a string and then using JavaScript to parse that string again. That just seems really ugly to me. That doesn't seem like the right way. I'm looking at the solution that I looked at before where I take a date and then I call all these get UTC methods on it. Not loving that either. And then I eventually get to the point where I just try to experiment a little bit. So let's see, where do I get there? I'm still looking at different Stack Overflow answers. Let's get to the experimentation. We don't have time for all this. Okay. And I think here I'm using burp, which I use for a lot of my web development. It shows me the raw HTTP proxies. It's similar to Charles or HTTP Toolkit. And what I'm just confirming here is that the date is the format that I'm imagining it is. So it's just the year, month, day. So I want to experiment with creating date entries from that. And so what I'm doing here is just saying, doing console.log. And I'm just saying, like, let's imagine I don't have a moment. Let's see what it looks like if I just calculate the difference between two dates. And what I'm seeing here for me is that the first entry is kind of an arbitrary number, but then the next 140 entries are all the same number. So that's really promising. That it looks like that's just the number of, at first I thought it was the number of seconds per week. I think it's actually the number of milliseconds per week. So that's looking really good, that it's just, that must have crossed daylight savings time boundaries, and it's the same number every time. So that's looking really promising and telling me that I can maybe just, and then you see me like trying to figure out what is 168,000. So I'm realizing, okay, it is 7 days. And so this is giving me hope that I can just get rid of moment.js and do it with raw JavaScript or with native JavaScript. And so here, and because I've done this refactoring where like the only reference to moment is this in this one place, it's really easy for me to do that. I just have to replace this one line to get to the pure JS implementation. And that's going a little fast. And so I messed up here and left it. Yeah, I accidentally left it at the moment.js implementation instead of the pure JS. I don't know why I start adding a new function before fixing the last error. Hopefully I figure out that that's not the right thing. Nope, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I start doing this other function instead of just fixing the unit test to get back to green. But it is a nice refactoring. I changed it to, instead of saying like, is the distance between entries 7 days, I just said, are the entries consecutive? So that doesn't work because I never fixed the error in the first place, which is dumb. But it actually is a nice refactoring. Let's just hope I quickly figure out that I'm still using moment.js, and I need to get rid of that. So I tried thinking maybe it's the wrong order. I'm still monkeying around with this, but the error again, it's right here. I shouldn't be calling moment. What I'm trying to do, I think I just accidentally deleted the wrong line. It should just be b minus a instead of moment wrappers around them. And let's see how long. Okay, there we go. I finally figured out what was going wrong. And let's see, there's still an error because I changed multiple things at the same time. And while we're at it, I might as well just get rid of moment, and I'm getting rid of it here, so I don't have to call moment at all. I'm just passing around the native JavaScript date type. And And I think the issue I have is that I put in, oops, this wrapper function that's throwing things off. So the error here is that I shouldn't have, yeah, it's this function that's throwing things off. I should have stopped refactoring when I made build break. And I just got to go back to return milliseconds between entries. So how long is it going to take? Okay, there we go. I think I figured it out. Oh, I thought that was the error. Is that not the error? Let's see. Let's see. Okay, I think it was also missing less than or equal. So if it's recent, it doesn't have to be exactly 7 days. It can be less than or equal to 7 days, and that was the problem. So that's sort of a dumb error in that, like, I shouldn't continue refactoring when the build is broken. I should get it back to green. Here, I'm just changing the name of current streak to latest streak, because I think current streak is a little bit less obvious, and it's also like conflicting with the variable name here. I don't think it actually conflicts with it. It's just a little bit more obvious if they have different names. I do a little bit more refactoring. I can show you again the final. What the final version looks like is I got rid of more variables. So our entries consecutive. I just use the entries array instead of naming entries like current entry and previous entry. And I think it's a little bit cleaner for that. So the final implementation is like pretty clean and elegant. I think the refactoring helps it a lot. So come back here. And I think this is actually pretty much it. So I waited a really long time to commit. I should have committed earlier and just pushed to GitHub just to get a record. And I think the last few things is just me. It's just me. Like this is kind of like an interesting, maybe like a little bit of trivia. So I noticed this actually failing, and I thought maybe it's because it's particular about it wants the // in front of it. The issue is actually here because I'm using an Alpine image, and the convenience script I use relies on bash, and Alpine does not include bash by default. So as I ran it in CircleCI, I don't know if I can catch it here. This is me just tweaking my, oops, let's see, I think it was, okay, so yeah, this is, when it runs in CI in a Docker Alpine image, it's saying the script is not found. That's like the most annoying error because the script is actually there. It's just what's actually not found is the bash interpreter. And so what I had to do was, do I end up rerunning? Yeah, I run the job with SSH, but the solution was to just change this to from Alpine to Buster Slim. Buster Slim is about twice as big. It's like a 50 megabyte image rather than like Alpine's 27 megs. That's not too bad. So I don't think there's anything else that's that interesting. Thank you for sticking with it. This was a long one, so I hope there were things that you enjoyed in this. And that's all.